Good morning, everybody. Nice to see everybody this morning. Our webinar will be starting in about 2 minutes. So I see that many of you are starting to log on right now. Good morning to all of you. I'm just going to pull up the slide deck that we'll be following together and give everyone a chance to log in. So like I said, we'll be starting in about 2 minutes. Okay, like I said, we'll be starting in about a minute. Good morning to those of you who are just logging in right now. I'm just going to give it about another minute or so before we get started. Okay, so I think we are ready to get started. One thing I learned from last week, I had some people emailing me as to why they might be having a tough time logging in. So let me just quickly check my email. I have one person who's saying, help, I can't log in. So Ken Gerino is a coworker of mine. He's on this webinar. I know you can't see him or hear him, but Ken, I know you hear me. I'm going to forward you the email that one of the people who are supposed to participate in today's webinar just sent me. So if you don't mind checking that out and getting in touch with her, that would be great. All right. So hopefully everybody has had a very healthy and productive week. What I'm going to do is just do a little bit of an introduction about the topics, I should say, that we're going to be covering today. There are 27 of you so far, and the number is climbing as far as people logging in. Couple housekeeping items that I wanted to go over. For those of you who are first-time joiners with us, welcome. It's so good to have you with us. I hope that you find it really enjoyable. My name's Elizabeth Sapola, and I work as an executive consultant at Decision Associates. So for those of you who are new to this, and for those of you who've been with us before, just a couple of important reminders. Number one, make sure that if you have any questions, please feel free. You can ask them one of two ways. Actually, technically one of three ways. One of the ways you can ask the questions is to physically type in the question that you would like answered at the end when we have our open Q&A segment. And you can just type that into the Q&A link that you'll see within your Zoom window. So just hover your mouse around and you'll see it show up, but there should be a little tab that says Q&A, and it should give you an opportunity to type in a question. So that's one way. Another way is before the webinars, I always have some people email me different questions that they'd like included, or throughout the week, actually, people will email me questions and I send them answers throughout the week for their unique situations. There is one individual who had submitted a question late last night that I'm going to be including at the end during open Q&A. So we'll be reviewing that together as a group. And the last little housekeeping item I wanted to go over is the fact that everybody's microphones are muted, everyone with the exception of myself. And when it gets to that point, Erin Phillips, who is a coworker of mine, who is also going to be available to participate, as well as a guest presenter that I'll be introducing you to in just a few moments. Her name is Melissa Solkowski. All right, so giddy up, here we go. Oh, bear with me one second. Okay, so the things that we're going to be covering today are as follows. I want to introduce you to today's presenters. I know, again, most of you have been with us several times already, but there are also a lot of people joining us for the first time today. So I'm going to be doing an introduction so that you have an idea of who I am, so I'm not just some random talking head, as well as, like I said, our guest presenter Melissa Solkowski and Erin Phillips. After that, we're actually going to dive right into the prepared material. And today, because we have some really important topics, I prepared about 40 minutes of prepared material, give or take 5 minutes. So that will leave us between 15 and 20 minutes of live Q&A at the end. I try to be very thoughtful in terms of wrapping at exactly the time that I had said I would wrap. So you don't have to worry about being on here longer than noon. I know we're all very, very busy. So the topics that we're going to cover today, we're going to be going over some compliance updates, as well as some new CDC guidelines for essential businesses. And then we're going to touch upon something that probably hasn't been on most of your radars, and that is an underlying challenge that isn't really at the top of our minds while we're coping with COVID-19 and all the challenges it presents, and that would be preventing and navigating unionization efforts. And then the last topic we're going to be talking about, which I'll tell you we'll be spending the most amount of time with, is the topic of the emotional well-being of your employees and you due to the pandemic, and what we can do to help ourselves and others. And that is where our guest presenter, Melissa Solkowski, is going to come in. She'll be leading that portion of today's webinar. All right, so the next thing I want to touch upon is just giving an introduction as to who it is that you're hearing from right now, as well as wanting to introduce you to somebody else who's going to be available to help answer questions at the end. So as you can see, I've had actually Erin and myself, we both work very closely together here at Decision Associates. We're partners in the human capital side of the business, but we've both been doing what we do exactly the same amount of time. And you can see right here very clearly our work experience, the different positions we've held, the industries that we've worked with, and our educational and professional credentials, I should say. So that gives you a little bit of an introduction to us. I'm going to unmute Erin so that he can introduce himself to everybody. Erin, please feel free to speak.
Good morning, everyone. Elizabeth, thank you again for putting this material together for this week. You know, I think the topics are exactly what we've been talking about with some of our employers. You know, the taking care of the employees, and especially with some of the new regulations that have come out requiring wearing masks, taking temperatures. That is, that's going to only heighten employee anxiety. And so I think inviting Melissa and to be part of today was a great idea, and greatly appreciate all the work you're doing on these weekly seminars for folks. So excited to have everybody. I think last you said almost 60 people were signed up to participate. So for all those on the call, really appreciate you taking some time this morning to be with us. And we're, all excited to work through this together, because they're great topics, and I know you're going to do a great job. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Erin. And Erin, at the end, I will unmute you again when it gets to the live Q&A portion. All right. So now I'm going to introduce to you today's guest presenter. And rather than me reading off all of her credentials, which you can see right in front of you as she gets a chance to introduce herself, I'm going to actually turn it over to Melissa, who will be leading the last topic that we'll be wrapping with. But I wanted her in the beginning to at least introduce herself to everybody so you know what you have to look forward to. Melissa.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Erin, both of you, for inviting me to participate in today's webinar. And I also wanted to thank Linda Stevenson, as her and I were having a conversation about doing something similar for our Athena women. And so we thought it made sense to join forces and collaborate on this. So I appreciate the invite. I'm also grateful that it is a webinar where you cannot see me because it is my Friday hair on top of my head in a bun, no makeup day. So I had a moment of panic when I was logging in and it was Zoom. I was like, wait a minute. So essentially you can kind of see a bit of what I do. And I would say in a nutshell, my area of specialization and focus is really on relationship dynamics, team dynamics, and communication, and helping people move through adversity. Most of my days are spent helping people problem solve during upset and helping facilitate them reaching agreements to join forces and unify to help create some of the safety and security that I'll be talking about. So thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And we really are in for a treat with Melissa. I'm very much looking forward to that portion. And how many of you had a little chuckle to yourself when Melissa mentioned about the fact that she has her hair up on top of her head in a cozy little look for today? Because I'm sure many of us on this Zoom call are appreciating the fact that there's no video for the same reason. One of the perks of working remotely. All right, so now let's delve right into our first prepared topic, and you'll see that the first prepared topic are just a handful, I should say, of compliance updates I wanted to make sure that everybody is up to speed on, as well as some new CDC guidelines that impact essential businesses. You know, I recognize the fact that a large portion of employers don't have an HR professional, so they don't necessarily have somebody who is, you know, completely charged with staying on top of these things. I also recognize the fact that a large portion of organizations have very qualified HR professionals, many of whom are joining us on this webinar today, but they are so inundated with all of the workplace implications that come along with this this pandemic and this COVID-19 health crisis that we're all experiencing. So we're just hoping that this provides you some additional information to make it that much easier for you. So the compliance updates we're going to touch upon are listed here, and we're going to go into each one a little bit more in depth. The first one has to do, it's a federal compliance update, meaning everybody on this call, unless you are in one of the industries that are listed as an exception, everybody on this call, this applies to you. So that would be the fact that OSHA scaled back the reporting requirements for COVID-19. The other compliance update, again, is another federal update, and that has to do with new CDC guidelines. So that only impacts essential businesses. So if you're not an essential business, this particular guideline won't impact you. I'm sorry, I have a little itch on my nose. So that one we'll get into. And then we have 3 state-specific compliance updates. One of them is specific to Pennsylvania. So for those of us who are from New York, you don't have to worry about that one. And that has to do with some additional safety measures that have just been announced. And then the final 2 have to do specifically only with New York State employers, because we have a lot of employers from New York State joining us each week, a lot of employers from Pennsylvania joining us each week, and we have several employers from Ohio joining us each week as well. But the New York State compliance updates I wanted to share with you have to do with some extensions and some new requirements of how to cover your face in public. So the first one I wanted to talk about is the fact that OSHA has scaled back reporting requirements for COVID-19. What does that mean? Now, sure, you could go and you could read the actual law, but it is very, very lengthy, and sometimes it's really, really difficult to get to the bottom of, okay, what are they trying to say and how does this impact me? So I tried to chunk this out in a way that would be really, really easy and bite-sized little pieces for you to understand and know, okay, what does this mean to me? What do I have to do? And so I want to make sure everyone knows that you as an employer still do need to investigate and record cases if, and by cases I'm talking about OSHA recordable cases, if there is objective evidence that a COVID-19 case may be work-related, And this could include a number of cases developing among employees who work closely together. So let's say, for example, you know, you have one person that has come down with COVID-19. There's no objective evidence necessarily that that would be work related. So according to the new reporting requirements just released by OSHA, you wouldn't necessarily need to investigate and record that case, because one could argue that there's no objective evidence that it could be work related. However, if there is objective evidence, and I just gave an example of what that might be. So for example, if multiple cases develop suddenly amongst your employees, amongst employees who work closely together, obviously that could be deemed as credible objective evidence that it could be work related. So I just want to make sure you know that you do still need to investigate and record COVID-19 cases if you have objective evidence that it could be work related. If you don't have that, you don't need to record and investigate it. The other thing is that it's important that you understand that, you know, when I read through everything, the evidence, because again, they're a little bit, they're not as specific as we would like as employers, right? In terms of, okay, is this objective evidence or is this not objective evidence? So, you know, when you as an employer are trying to make a determination if this is something that would apply or wouldn't apply. So I wanted to just provide some additional information to support that. So when they were giving further definition of what it would mean if it was, you know, deemed to be objective evidence, you as an employer, okay, have a responsibility to investigate and record it if that evidence was reasonably available to you as an employer. And so this language that you're reading right here was copied and pasted and taken directly from the announcement that was released by OSHA. So, you know, examples of reasonably available evidence, it could include information given to you by employees. It could include information that you learn about regarding your employees' health and safety just through the ordinary course of running your business. Not necessarily that you're sniffing around for, but just you happen to stumble upon that information and learn about it. That could be deemed as objective evidence. So those are examples of reasonably available evidence as per the OSHA's guidelines. So what does this not mean? It does not mean that you can ignore obvious clues. So you as an employer do not get free rein to say, oh, I'm going to turn a blind eye and I'm just going to pretend I have no objective evidence because it's just too much for me to handle. You truly do, the onus is on you as an employer to really make sure you know, you understand, you have a good argument behind you of whether or not it would be deemed as reasonably available objective evidence. So I wanted to make sure you understood that because that's new and different. So the new guideline states this, okay? First of all, previously, it used to be the case. So previous to this new guideline, everybody was directed to investigate and record all work-related cases of COVID-19. And the federal government realized that this has become extremely cumbersome and difficult and very costly, quite honestly, for employers to put all the wheels of motion in place to investigate and determine if COVID-19 cases were work-related. It just became too costly, and that's definitely not what the federal government wants. So therefore, the new guidance states that employers do not have to investigate and record cases of COVID-19 unless, like we said in the previous slide, there's objective evidence that the occurrence is work-related and that you as the employer have had access to that evidence. So I want to make sure that you understand that. If you have any more unique or specific questions unique to your organization or a specific case, you can do one of two things, one of three things actually. You can either email or call me. Everybody has my contact information from the confirmation email I sent you for today's webinar. You can contact your labor attorney because, let me be clear, by no way, shape, or form are myself or Erin or Melissa labor attorneys, and we're coming at it from the perspective of having been HR executives for 20 years, giving you our expert guidance in terms of how we interpret it. But if you have something really, really tricky and unique, I definitely encourage you to contact a labor attorney. And the third way is to research independently and read the legislation to see if it provides you any more guidance. So that's the first update. The next update I wanted to share with you has to do with new CDC guidelines for essential businesses. So to clarify, there are essential businesses represented on this call today, on this webinar. What I'm about to share with you only applies to those businesses, and those businesses are deemed critical by the federal government. So that would be businesses or industries such as healthcare, grocery stores, and food processing plants. I can't talk today. So let's take a look at what the old guidelines stated. The old guidelines stated that any worker who has been in close contact with anyone, even suspected of having COVID-19, in order to prevent that spread, the potential spread of that illness, all workers were told to isolate at home for 14 days after that potential exposure. The new guidelines have just come into effect, and those state that, again, this is only essential workers, okay? Essential workers who have been exposed, they can stay on the job. However, they have to stay on the job while also simultaneously monitoring their symptoms. So as long as an employee doesn't show any symptoms, then they can stay on the job. However, they really need to wear a face mask. They have to avoid getting close to other people, and they have to submit to a daily temperature check by the employer. So for you as an employer, what does this mean? Well, you as an employer are asked, based upon these new guidelines by the CDC, you are expected to frequently clean and sanitize workspaces. You're expected to make sure you increase the air exchange in rooms. You're expected to, chunk out work breaks so that everyone isn't going at the same time and getting in too close of proximity with one another. And you're expected to immediately send anybody home who becomes ill. And the reason why this change came into effect is because, as all of you know, if you've been following the news, the US is obviously battling a huge war on this terrible, terrible disease, and the deaths and the hospitalizations are continuing to increase. So it's more important than ever that our critical workforce is able to keep working. And in addition to that, the US is beginning to make plans for a reopening of sorts. So that's why the change was announced. So again, that's a federal guideline update, and that only applies to people in the industries that we just covered, deemed essential by the federal government. All right, so the next has to do only with the state of Pennsylvania, and these are additional safety measures that were just announced, and these have to do with businesses with any in-person operations. And I'll tell you that this applies to every single business operating in the state of Pennsylvania, or every operation in the state of Pennsylvania, except for healthcare providers. And Pennsylvania's Governor Wolf announced this, and it is in effect immediately. So one thing, and again, I wanted to chunk it out so you can take it in bite-sized little pieces and understand, what does this mean to me? So every single business, in order to be permitted to continue to maintain your operations, effective immediately, you have to do the things that you see listed on the screen right in front of you. So you have to make sure that you have proper protocols in place if there is an exposure or a probable or confirmed case of COVID-19. Now, you'll recognize, those of you who were on the webinar last week, we talked about this, ironically, when we were sharing, best practices and resources that we provided based upon some guidelines from the state and federal health departments, what to do if there's an exposure. We also shared with you, after the webinar, we sent an email that was a sample of a checklist of specific things to do in the event of an exposure of a probable or confirmed case of COVID-19. So for those of you who received that and who were on the webinar last week, everyone who was on it received this. If you follow that, I looked it over, and if you follow that, it goes along very nicely with these new measures that were announced by Governor Wolf. So that's something that you can use. But if you weren't on the call and you would like it, just send me an email afterwards and I'll share it with you. All right, so you have to identify who the person is. And again, my nose is running. I do apologize. Let me get a little tissue. I think I'm allergic to talking about COVID-19, talking about, thinking about, researching it, all those fun things. But ready or not, I'm here doing it. So as far as what to do, you have to make sure you have protocol. And specifically, you have to identify who it is. You have to identify who that individual or those individuals came in close contact with. But you can never, never, never reveal their identity. You must maintain confidentiality of who that individual is. You also have to implement a temperature screening for every employee before starting work, and you have to send home any employee with a fever that is 100.4 degrees or higher. You also must stagger your work start times. And the reason why is because, again, kind of like the previous slide for the other legal update that we shared, you want to make sure you stagger periods of time where people are coming and going, because you don't want large groups to form. And you have to make sure that that congregation that happens in common areas is limited. You also have to provide masks for employees. You have to make it mandatory that your employees wear the masks at work unless they are eating or drinking during a designated break time. You also have to make sure that no visitors who are non-essential to your operation, you have to prohibit them from entering your premises. And you must notify your state's Department of Health, your state or local Department of Health, of your workplace safety. Notify your employees of the safety procedures. What I was trying to roll into that is the fact that you still do, just to make sure, for those of you who weren't on last week's call, if you do have a probable or confirmed case of COVID-19 in the workplace, you still do need to contact your Department of Health and take their guidance as far as what steps to take from that point onward. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure you don't forget that as well. All right, so in addition to everything that I just shared, all businesses who are open to the public have to do these additional things. You have to make sure that all of the business you conduct is by appointment only. If that's not feasible, such as a grocery store operation, for example, or a gas station, you have to limit your occupancy to no more than 50%. You also have to make sure that you have those social distances maintained. You have to make sure you have the proper barriers installed to make sure that your employees who are coming face to face with your customers, that they have a safe barrier. You also have to make sure that every single customer who comes onto your premises wears a mask. And if someone is not wearing a mask, you have to deny them entry. Now, there are some exceptions to this, to include customers who physically can't wear a mask because of a medical condition. And, if you want more specific guidance on that, I'm going to tell you the same thing as I said a few moments ago. Certainly you can talk to me offline. We can work through that together. If it's a really tricky, unique situation, then definitely I encourage you to confer with your attorney. And the third thing is you can also do some independent research as well. But I want to make sure you know where to get the answers and you know that we're here as a resource. If there is, not if, but you have to make sure that you designate a specific time for high risk or elderly customers to come in and use the business separate from the rest of the public. And you must schedule hand washing breaks for all of your employees at least every hour. So all of these measures are in effect, effective immediately. The ones from the previous slide are in addition to the ones that you see in front of you right now, which apply to all businesses open to the public. The next two I just wanted to give you an update on. The New York State on pause legislation, that has been extended until May 15th. So for those of you with operations in New York State, hopefully by now that Governor Cuomo did announce that all current restrictions that we've been dealing with for several weeks now, and all closures, those have been extended until May 15th, and then they're going to be reevaluated after this most recent closure period. And then the last update, again, for anyone with operations in the state of New York, effective today, so this went into effect today, all New York State residents have to wear face coverings when they are in public and where social distancing is not possible, such as going into the grocery store, if you're riding in an Uber or taking public transportation of any sort, or when you're walking up and down crowded sidewalks. All right, so that's it as far as legal updates. The next thing I wanted to touch upon, and this will be quick, and by the way, I'm keeping an eye on time. I see that the legal updates went a little bit longer. I do apologize, but to honor the very important topic that Melissa is here to talk about, I'm going to still allow her full 20 minutes to speak because it is such a critical topic. But that doesn't mean those of you who are on the call are going to be left out of the open Q&A, because what we'll do instead, if we run out of time towards the end for the full-blown Q&A, what we'll do instead is, if you don't mind emailing me your questions, I will respond to those questions and share them out with the entire group when I send the materials, such as the recording of today's webinar, the slide deck, and other materials at the end. So everyone will still get the benefit of the open Q&A, but it's such an important topic, I don't want to cut Melissa short. All right, so the next topic I want to make sure that we talk about is this underlying challenge that probably isn't on a lot of people's radar, and that would be how to prevent and navigate unionization efforts. So I wanted to first start out with a reality check. First of all, almost every single employer on this call is eligible for union organization. So if you're thinking to yourself, it can't happen here, it's never happened before, let me tell you that times such as this, when there is a mass amount of uncertainty, when there is a mass amount of emotional and social strain put on your employees and on you as an organization, and when there's a mass amount of additional requirements being thrust upon you and your employees all at once, these are the perfect time to create a perfect storm, so to speak, for the potential of union organization. And the reason why is because when you think about it, right? When is an employee most likely to want to actually consider joining a union? Well, they're most likely to consider that if they feel as though, they're being treated in a way that's unfair, if they're not getting the information that they feel they should be getting from management, and if they're just overall, feeling a sense of dissatisfaction of how they're being treated by management. Maybe they're feeling unnerved because they don't feel safe in the workplace, right? And I think a lot of us who are operating and continuing to have employees report to work, a lot of us are dealing with that. Your employees are not feeling safe despite your best efforts, okay? In addition to that, if an employee feels as though management is not being responsive to their requests for their concerns to be addressed, those can definitely, increase the chances of unionization efforts to take place in your organization. So I wanted to make sure that you understand that, and that you understand not only why unions form, but you understand the fact that, hey, let's make a connection between our current reality in the United States, and the world for that matter, and the impact it's having upon our employees and upon us as managers and upon our organization. Again, it really is the perfect storm for this potential to occur. So the good news is, because there's always good news, and I think this is phenomenal news, union avoidance is actually quite easy. And when I say it's quite easy, it truly is all about minimizing your employees' dissatisfaction and about really demonstrating and showing you care and being there for them. Now, this topic carries over from last week's topic, because if you remember, we touched upon a lot of very specific things that you can do to really create and nurture a culture of engagement, of satisfaction, of open communication with your employees during a time when so many of us are forced to work remotely. And so truly, if you follow some of those things, and I had sent everybody who was registered for last week's call, I had sent everybody a pretty comprehensive toolkit that I spent the week creating last week that really breaks down for you what you can do to create a culture of engagement and to help the communication within your organization during a time, not only when we're dealing with COVID, but also during a time when everybody's working remotely, or so many of us are. So by incorporating some of those things, such as what we talked about last week, and again, if you weren't on last week's call, but you're on this week's call, please email me separately and I'd be happy to share it with you. You know, it's all about showing you care. You cannot fake it till you make it. You have to authentically care. Take a look at who your managers are in these key roles who have influence over your employees. This is not a time to tolerate uncaring, callous behavior by your management and by your leaders. They must authentically show that they care. They're very fragile right now, not only your employees, but your managers as well. And you as a business owner, for those of you on the call who are business owners, need to really show that you care, and it's going to trickle down from there. You also have to make sure that you're fair and consistent in your application of all of these new policies and practices and guidelines that are coming down at a very rapid pace. And you have to make sure you have open, frequent, and transparent communication. There is nothing wrong with over communication. In fact, that's what I challenge all of you to aim for. And if you have your employees' trust, and if you show that you trust them and you recognize them for everything that they are doing to keep your doors open and everything they're doing to continue helping those your organization serves, that is exactly what it's all about in terms of avoiding unionization efforts. So now what to do if a union shows up and they want to start a campaign, because that does happen. In fact, I've heard of organizations in the Erie area where that is happening right now. So you want to make sure that you communicate very openly with your employees, and it has to be in a non-threatening manner. You never, never, never want to engage in unfair labor practices. And there's a well-known acronym that I can't take credit for, but anyone who has any knowledge of union avoidance has heard of this acronym. And this is an acronym to help you as a manager, to help you as a business leader, to help you as a nonprofit leader, to help you as an HR professional remember what not to do when you're responding to unionization efforts. So you never want to threaten, you never want to interrogate, you never want to make promises, and you never want to engage in any sort of surveillance or spying. And you can all read right there what that means, but that's a really, really helpful acronym to remember what not to do if a union shows up to start a campaign. All right, so now we are going to turn it over to Melissa. And like I said, we have a total of 24 minutes before we wrap, and I really want to honor your time and be respectful of that. But what we're going to do, because I don't want anyone to feel gypped by the open Q&A, if we don't have time for that at the end, which is not a problem, I'm going to capture your questions. You can also email me questions and I will answer those to you, and also capture them on that rolling list of questions and answers that I've been keeping and sending out to everybody. I will do that and I will send it out to you. So nobody's going to be gypped on the open Q&A. We're just going to have to be a little bit flexible and do it differently this week because of this important topic. All right, so I'm turning it over to Melissa. I am going to mute my own microphone, as a matter of fact. And okay, Melissa, are you there?
Yes.
Okay, I guess I can't mute myself. I'll just have to be quiet. When I mute me, I mute you. Okay, go ahead, Melissa.
So again, I just wanted to thank you for allowing me to participate in today's webinar. I can also include my email in the chat box if that would be helpful if people do have questions beyond today's information. So I'm happy to serve as an ongoing resource for businesses.
Yes, and Melissa, just so you know, and so everyone on the webinar today knows, I will share all of your contact information with everybody as well afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So the first thing I just want to start with is being able to acknowledge and empathize and normalize what limbo, which is kind of what we're all living right now, the unknown, comes with. So there's some neuroscience behind this that I think is just helpful for people to be aware of. It's definitely a known fact that our brain does not like adversity. In general, as humans, we tend to overestimate our fear in uncertainty and underestimate our ability to manage the uncertainty. So just to educate people and being aware that that is globally what is happening, which really amplifies us to go into that from the reptilian brain to the limbic brain. It's sort of that fight or flight space. Anytime, if you've experienced adversity historically, we all go to those self-preservation spaces of fight or flight. That's sort of what is happening for all of us at this point, and is amplified when there's uncertainty. So as employers, I think being able to recognize that that's happening, as well as creating the space for our employees relative to their way of coping through that, is just vital. It speaks to some of what Elizabeth was saying as far as supporting them and being aware of what they're needing and creating that authentic culture. So just understanding what's happening from a neuroscience standpoint, and that it may show up in different ways for people. I would say in general, some people cope by overfunctioning based on just personality and somewhat where we come from, which might mean they're reorganizing or revamping a project that's already been tended to. Some people function in more kind of avoidant ways or covert ways, and may want to just step away from something they've been working on or shift gears to create a sense of order and calm on the inside. So just normalizing some of those pieces, that when fear and unknown and uncertainty is at play, it sends our brain into a space of self-preservation and fight or flight. And then being able to, I found what is helpful is just being able to name our experience more as a collective grief process can be helpful. You know, there are different stages of grief that have been identified over the years. And I would say if there's anything I've learned, whether it's personally or professionally, grief is not linear. It's not check off the box. Okay, now we've understood this is what's happening and we're over the shock and denial, and then we get angry about it. It just doesn't happen that way. It really is a cyclical experience and can come and go in waves. And there's really no right or wrong in how that happens. And it happens differently for everyone. Everyone is on their own timeline and experiencing that. So just being able to, again, recognize that within ourselves, recognize that with the family members that we may be surrounded by, but also our employees that are experiencing those same things. And then once we allow ourselves to identify what is happening, that we embrace what is happening in terms of the feelings that it comes with. It kind of came up with a little saying around that, just to embrace what rather than erase. That really moving through grief is probably while the most challenging, the healthiest way that we can embrace what's happening. Again, I've seen people get stuck in grief and be kind of defining their existence for the next 20 years in an experience. And I've seen people avoid it and bury their head in the sand. And if we don't talk about it, we don't think about it, we don't feel it, it's not happening, which can really present in more self-destructive ways. So I do write articles for our paper, and there is one, if you go to Go Erie, that is on moving through adversity in life. So just referencing how people experience grief differently and normalizing that and being aware of it. Also being aware of just some of the secondary effects for our employees. Some employees who may have small children that don't have daycare at this point. I have a therapist in my office who called the other day and said she was trying to do a telehealth visit and her 3 children under 5 were outside vacuuming up the rain with her Dyson. So just to be aware that there are some secondary impacts here for our employees as well. Some households that are going from 2 incomes down to 1, or some of us who have experienced loved ones passing away as a result of COVID. So again, just understanding that grief process for everyone and how each person is on their own timeline in that experience. I do have I'm on an international board, and our president is actually in Italy, and she described it very well. She said initially we went into a crisis response, and then all of a sudden life sort of paused and slowed down, as did time and space. And then we all sort of took a collective breath, and gradually life is resuming. So just being able to recognize that that's happening for all of us. And then how we manage it, which is the slide that's up here now. Really two things that I've been able to identify that help people move through grief. I'm not a believer that we get over it. I believe we get through it. So just good self-care, that you're modeling that for your employees, and that you're surrounding yourself with healthy support system, so that they can see that you're taking care of yourself and intentionally making the time to do that. I think offering employees resources, whether it's, any sort of mental health support or financial coaching, and really being willing to reroute how you've traditionally done things and lean into those changes rather than leaning out. So being able to find strengths in your employees as a team and the differences that they come with, even if their coping is amplified right now, being able to, again, embrace that, look at that, and really use that in a way that can strengthen your network right now and your organization right now. Being able to connect with your employees. I know some organizations are doing online workout challenges. Some are doing, I know for myself, we do virtual meetups every week. Sometimes it's a virtual happy hour, but just being able to really engage and stay connected so that they know you're there and that you're modeling healthy ways of moving through this. And then what builds safety and security? So again, I mentioned earlier on the call that most of my days are spent helping people through life turning on its head experience and adversity. How do we create the conditions, if you will, for them to feel safe and secure through adversity? And these are just some of the ways that I've identified in the work that I do and with organizations, is really being able to have that open, effective, transparent conversation. Again, sometimes based on personality or based on life experiences, there's a tendency to want to avoid looking at where we're at or avoid those conversations, but it really is a time to challenge yourself as a leader to lean into those conversations, because it starts with you, in really being that leader and that vulnerable self, to be able to demonstrate for them that it's safe to have these conversations and communicate through things rather than avoiding them. I think avoiding those pieces is what really lends itself to conflict and misperception and people personalizing things that have occurred. So the more above board you are in why you're doing things that you're doing or why we're having conversations that we're having, the healthier space you're going to create for your employees. And then clear expectations and follow through. When we do, again, I know for my own business, we do weekly meetups, and there's an agenda that I'll present so that everyone's clear and there's something tangible that everyone can have built in that's predictable during this unpredictable time. And then being able to follow through on doing what you say you're going to do. So not just kind of talking the talk, but really walking the walk on what they can expect from you as a leader in the organization. And then being consistent. We all know that the more structure and predictability we have, the more clear expectations are around us, that increases our chance of being successful. So really trying to be consistent, all the time, but specifically in this unknown time is very, very important and can allow employees to feel a sense of security. And then really establishing healthy roles and boundaries, kind of who's doing what in the organization, who's covering what, and how that functionality is happening, even if it's flexing out of how it traditionally happened. It's almost like I do a lot of work on boundaries and how those show up in systems. So it might be a time that I use the analogy of a fence, and what decision-making, who and what decision-making power happens inside of that fence, and when do we need to broaden that fence and when do we need to tighten that fence. I think this uncertain time is a time when we can widen that fence and sort of, for lack of better words, pick our battles, and really give some flexibility to people in how they're coping and how things are functioning, but also keep those established boundaries. So really no different than, situations that if you look at it, I often use this analogy from a parenting standpoint. If adversity happens for your child, you might have more space and, openness and flexibility and how they're coping around that, but it doesn't mean you're going to completely put the fence down and let them, run the situations, because they need that security. And then the last thing is just unified leadership. Again, if I talk about just from a business standpoint, the managers, the owners of organizations really unifying and being on the same page to have what I would call a shared narrative or a shared mantra that you are communicating to your employees. That is what's going to help them feel secure through this time. That's what's going to help them feel safe through this time. If that's fragmented, if there are different messages coming down and everyone's not sort of singing off the same sheet, that's going to create uncertainty, more uncertainty. That's going to create question marks. That's going to create a lack of value in terms of what needs to be happening right now in your organization. So that unified leadership from the top down, Elizabeth used words earlier that I often use. It's a trickle down effect. So the more secure the leadership is, the more on the same page the leadership is, the more transparent, effective communication that's happening at that level, you're modeling that for them to feel secure in that and draw upon that and how they're coping around the circumstance. And then one of the things, I think we're all experiencing in some ways, there's a lot of information coming at us, and oftentimes that can be somewhat paralyzing. So I like to remind people just to take small bites, and these are just some examples of things that you could do today, and I would encourage you to do today. A lot of times we go to trainings or conduct trainings, and we put all that information in a nice little binder, and it sits on the shelf collecting dust. So I like to challenge people to think of something they can actually do today as an employer and as a human in your family, something that you will actually do today for yourself, for your family, for your organization. And these are just some examples of things that might be helpful for you and for them. Again, that will create some certainty, some predictability, and really honor what everybody's needing at this point in time. The other thing that I think is helpful that I didn't add on here, but occurred to me after, is just really taking the time to document what you're doing and how you're doing it. Not so much, and again, I give my disclaimer, while I work with lots of attorneys, I am not one, not so much from a legal standpoint documentation, but more really introspective and reflecting what's working, what's not, and what changes you might make moving forward. Just to show your agility as an organization and being able to move through adversity. I do, as I mentioned, work with attorneys, and had a judge who I did a presentation for some of our judges, and he ended up quoting me on the bench. Really, a statement that I use often is adversity is an opportunity for self-growth. And so how you move through this is really modeling, again, not only for your family, but your organization, how adversity can be an opportunity for self-growth. So taking that time to reflect and look at what you're doing and what's working and what's not, and the adaptation around that, and some of the silver lining in what we're experiencing is really, really helpful.
Okay.
There should
Melissa,
be
are
one.
you there?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry.
You can go to the next slide. Sorry.
No, you lost it. No, I went silent. I'm like, oh no.
Okay. And then just being kind and compassionate and not forgetting to laugh. A lot of times people will suggest that, I can't trust this person, or I can't be happy unless this person's happy. Externally imposing those experiences upon others is really, I would encourage people to shift their thinking around that. The trust and kindness and happiness is really within each of us. And it's tapping into that to share that with other people from the inside out, rather than seeking that from the outside in. that's going to be most beneficial, not just today, but throughout life. But I think, again, with things being amplified right now, being able to tune into that and treat yourself intentionally to that time, so that you can give that to other people. We all need a little more kindness and compassion. And again, not forgetting to laugh. I did add a page. I think the next page is some resources and some things that I've been doing and using with family and my organization, is just having those meetups. Insight Timer is an app. It's a meditation app. I have a therapist in with me who does meditation and mindfulness, and that's a really valuable tool and an app that you can use to just remember to breathe. And then some engaging apps that I know my family, we've done some game nights with friends of ours, and we've used the House Party app, or there's a game that's a psych app. It's like almost similar to Boulder Dash if you've ever played that, but it can be really enjoyable. And then the power of laughter. I don't know if any of you have been to the National Comedy Center in Jamestown, but it is phenomenal. I personally have a son who is very comedic and is interested in that line of work at some point, but just the healing power of laughter and how beneficial that can be right now, and not forgetting to do that. A book that I think is very pointed for where we're at today, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, would be a great resource. I mentioned the articles that I do for our paper, lots of information in those. And then another thing we've been doing, just as, again, an organization and a fun conversation as well as a family, is just making a list of first. So what's the first restaurant we're going to go to when this is, beyond us? And what's the first vacation? Or what are the top 5 things we want to do once we can go out and socialize again? So just to be finding creative ways to engage and support, again, starting with yourself, and then broadening out from there, your family, your organization, I think can be really helpful. And we'll just support you leading through this, and we'll kind of set the stage to create a smoother transition when everyone can resume to life and the workplace.
Another resource that I just wanted to mention as well is there are noontime daily online support groups happening right now. They're being offered, and through the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI. And if you go to NAMI's main website, because obviously that's a national organization. If you go to the main website, and then you can do a search and figure out what your local chapter is. So for example, there is a local chapter in Erie County, Pennsylvania, and if you click on that and go to their website, right on the front page of their website, it'll give you information, and you can click on it. It makes it really easy to sign up to attend these weekday noon online support group meetings. So I just wanted to throw that out there as another option as well. And I'm positive there are many more similar types of options, regardless of what organization or mental health organization or that is your preference, but also regardless of exactly where you are. Okay. All right. So Melissa, thank you so much. And I must say, I'm very impressed, because I believe I had mentioned that we had exactly 24 minutes left. And I said, hey, Melissa, can you keep it to 20 minutes? And it is literally right on the nose, Melissa. You are a rock star. So we have 3 minutes and 30 seconds left for Q&A. I do see one thing that has been put up there. So one of the questions that was sent to me, which again, I will answer through the written document that I'll send. Do you know why healthcare providers aren't required to implement some of the public business requirements? It seems very counterintuitive. I plan to implement mine regardless. So that's one. And let's see here. Sorry, I'm just trying to manage this. Bear with me one moment. I had another question that somebody just raised their hand. And now I lost you. I do apologize for that. I don't know where you went. But let me share one question with you that I did want to make sure we got time for. Someone had submitted this question prior to today's session. And the question was, if a business is operating as an essential business, what if an employee refuses to wear a mask? Specifically, if the employee claims that the use of a mask restricts their breathing and causes an increase in anxiety due to the reduction of oxygen. This employee, let's say, would like to be laid off so they can stay at home and avoid that issue with the anxiety and restriction of oxygen and continue to be paid. So this question, I'll tell you, I've thought a lot about it, and this is not a cut or dry answer that I can provide for you, but I still thought it was extremely beneficial for everyone to hear this. So first of all, there are other laws that come into play, such as the Americans with Disabilities Act. It is entirely possible that they have a diagnosed mental health condition that truly can be substantiated and can qualify them to take leave under the ADA. So I don't know this specific employee. I don't know all the nuances of everything that's involved, but I can tell you that this is definitely not a cut and dry, boom, here's the answer situation. The answer is it depends, but I still thought everyone could benefit from hearing me say that, because the last thing you want to do is to innocently give an incorrect answer without conferring with a good labor attorney. And we recommend, if you look on the opening slide of the slide deck that I'll be sharing with you, we list 3 different labor attorneys from whom we've been gathering information and resources for these presentations. So make sure those are just 3 of many. I'm sure your organization might have one that you prefer, but I would encourage you not to just answer this question and try to take a stab at it. This can take you down a slippery slope in terms of liability. So my answer to you is to definitely confer with your attorney, because I don't want you to be in a legal situation that could otherwise be avoided. All right, so that's it. We're done with today's webinar. Like I said, I will make sure to capture all of your questions and make sure to send them to everybody. So I see a couple of people have sent some additional questions, but because of the fact I want to honor our time commitment, I am going to capture those and send them out. But have a very safe, healthy, and peaceful rest of your day, and enjoyable weekend with loved ones. Thanks so much.